The rhythmic metallic screech of a rusted hinge was the only thing filling the silence of my workshop, until the vibration in my pocket shattered the peace. I, Vincent Carter, a 61-year-old retired civil engineer, was replacing a rusted hinge on my workshop door when the call that changed everything arrived. The sharp September sunlight slanted through the workshop window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air as I wiped a bead of sweat from my brow. The air was thick with the comforting scent of WD-40 and old cedar, a smell that usually grounded me in the quiet order I had maintained since my wife, Patricia, died 3 years ago. I had been focused on the tactile resistance of the metal, just one more turn on the screw to align the frame perfectly. Patricia always hated that sound of a squeaky door, so I suppose I was doing it for her as much as for myself. I reached into my denim pocket, feeling the cold vibration of my smartphone. It was an unknown number, but in a town like Beaverton, you usually answer, assuming it's a neighbor or the hardware store confirming an order. I pressed the screen and brought the phone to my ear, still tasting the bitter dregs of stale coffee on the back of my tongue. "Vincent, is that you?" a voice asked. It was raspy and rushed, a stark contrast to the sleepy Tuesday afternoon vibe of the neighborhood. I recognized the caller after a second of processing the tone. Warren Phillips, my 72-year-old neighbor and a retired postal worker, possessed a voice that usually carried the slow weight of a man with nowhere to be. But today, it was trembling. He told me he was calling from 3 houses down. Have you ever felt the air grow thin in a room you've lived in for 20 years? Suddenly, the walls of my workshop felt like they were leaning in toward me. As Warren continued speaking, he was breathless, explaining that he had made a mistake with the security system he helped me install back in the spring. "I forgot to disconnect the cloud account from my personal tablet, Vincent," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw something on the living room feed while you were out." My heart skipped a beat as the realization set in that my neighbor had been unintentionally spying on my private home life for months. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask why he was watching, but the urgency in his voice stopped me cold. "It involves your daughter Vincent and that husband of hers, Trevor." I felt a sharp pang of apprehension tighten in my chest. Olivia and Trevor had been over for dinner just 2 nights ago, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Warren refused to explain further over the phone, citing the sensitivity of what he had witnessed on the screen. He insisted that I come to his house immediately and that I come alone. Then he said it, the name Olivia. He warned me in no uncertain terms not to call her or send a text until I had seen the footage for myself. My daughter has always been the pillar of my life, especially after Patricia passed, and the idea that Warren was implying she was involved in something dark enough to require a secret meeting felt like a physical blow to my stomach. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. "What did you see, Warren?" I asked, but the line had already gone dead, leaving me standing in the silence of my workshop, with nothing but the smell of cedar and a growing sense of dread. The engine of my truck roared to life, a jagged sound that mirrored the sudden, frantic drumming in my chest. I didn't waste time putting away my tools or locking the workshop. The urgency in Warren's voice had been a cold splash of reality that made the order of my woodshop feel irrelevant. I backed out of my driveway with a reckless speed I hadn't used in years, the tires chirping against the asphalt as I swung the wheel toward the quieter corner of Beaverton. My mind was a chaotic loop of questions. Why had my neighbor waited until now to tell me he was still connected to my security feed? More importantly, what could Olivia and Trevor possibly be doing in my house that would make a 72-year-old man sound like he'd seen a ghost? I drove the 3 streets over to Warren's modest ranch-style house, noting the faded blue siding and the overgrown hedges that suggested a man who had stopped caring about his own curb appeal. I pulled into his gravel driveway, the crunching sound under my tires feeling like bone breaking in the heavy afternoon silence. I was out of the cab before the engine had even fully shuddered to a stop. Warren Phillips didn't even wait for me to knock. He opened the door as I reached the porch, his face a map of deep-set regret and sleepless lines. He looked older than he had just last week, his shoulders slumped as if under an invisible weight. I realized then that Warren wasn't just a nosy neighbor. There was a haunted look in his eyes that only comes from personal experience. He led me into a small, dimly lit den that smelled of stale tobacco and old yellowed paper. Trust is like a pane of glass. Once it's shattered, you can spend a lifetime trying to glue the shards back together, but you'll never stop seeing the cracks. Warren gestured for me to sit, but I stayed on my feet, my muscles coiled with a restless energy. He told me then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, why he was so vigilant. 15 years ago, his own son had systematically drained his life savings. It started with a simple lie about a mortgage payment and ended with Warren losing nearly everything but this faded ranch. "I didn't think he was capable of it either, Vincent," he said, his hand trembling as he reached for a glass of water. "By the time I checked the accounts, the ink was already dry and the money was gone. If you're wondering why I didn't just turn around and leave, it's because the truth, no matter how ugly, is always better than a comfortable lie." Warren pointed to a laptop sitting on a cluttered desk, its screen glowing with a harsh blue clinical light that seemed to leach the color from the room. He reminded me of the weekend in the spring when he'd helped me install the cameras for my Seattle trip, admitting he'd neglected to remove his credentials from the cloud app. He told me he hadn't watched all of the footage because it felt like a violation of my privacy, but the few minutes he did happen to see were enough to make him pick up the phone. He revealed that this wasn't just one isolated conversation. There were 5 separate recorded meetings that had occurred while I was at the firm. The silence in the den was heavy enough to feel like physical pressure against my lungs. Warren's finger hovered over the mouse for a split second. Then he pressed play. The first video clip opened, and my living room appeared on the screen, bathed in the soft glow of a late afternoon. Olivia and Trevor were there, sitting on my couch. My daughter's face was etched with a worry I hadn't seen in years. Trevor, her husband, usually so charming and jovial, had a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He was holding a stack of papers, legal documents, I realized with a jolt. "This is the fastest way, Olivia," Trevor said, his voice low and insistent. "Your father won't even notice until it's too late." Olivia wrung her hands. "But it's Dad's house, Trevor. It's Emma's inheritance." Trevor scoffed. "Emma's inheritance? He's an old man, Olivia. He'll be gone soon enough. And besides, we need this money now. The loan sharks aren't patient." My blood ran cold. Loan sharks? Inheritance? What were they talking about? The video continued, showing Trevor explaining a scheme to transfer the deed of my house into their names, using a forged power of attorney. They planned to take out a massive loan against the property, then disappear, leaving me with nothing but a mountain of debt. My own daughter, in on this? The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. The next clips showed a chilling progression. In one, Trevor was on the phone, laughing about how easily he'd manipulated Olivia. "She's so naive," he sneered. "Thinks I actually love her. All I need is her signature on these papers, and we're free." He spoke of a woman named Melanie, a mistress he planned to run away with to Costa Rica, once the scheme was complete. My daughter was not just being used to steal from me, she was being discarded by the man she loved. The final video was the most devastating. It was recorded just yesterday morning. Olivia was crying, her face streaked with tears. "We go to the county office today," Trevor barked, his face leaning into hers. "I don't care if you're scared." Olivia's voice was a fragile whisper. "What if Dad knows, Trevor? What if he is waiting for us?" Trevor let out a jagged sound that was supposed to be a laugh. "He's an old man, Olivia. He's probably just confused by the new bank app." Then Trevor dropped the mask entirely. He admitted that he had personally walked the loan sharks past Emma's school to show them the target, proving his betrayal was an active choice, not a desperate reaction. Have you ever heard the sound of a mother's soul being traded for a lie? It's a silence so deep it swallows the room. Trevor snapped, grabbing Olivia's arm with a white-knuckled grip and pulling her toward him. He dropped the cold, final threat. The loan sharks knew Emma's exact recess time at Hawthorne Elementary, 10:15 a.m. He told her that if they didn't deliver the deed as collateral today, those criminals would make an example of our 5-year-old by the playground fence. I felt a sour, sharp scent of fear, my own or hers, I couldn't tell, drift through the mental image of the screen. I watched my daughter collapse into total defeat, her spirit breaking as she realized her own husband had weaponized their child's safety. You said you would leave her out of this, she sobbed, her body shaking under the load of his coercion. You promised. Trevor didn't flinch. Promises don't pay debts, Olivia. Only deeds do. He let go of her arm, leaving red marks on her skin that burned into my retinas. 9 a.m. That was the time they set for the end of my life. I decided it would be the start of theirs. Olivia nodded slowly, her face a mask of hollow grief, as she agreed to meet him at the county office tomorrow morning to finalize the filing. Trevor smoothed his shirt with a chilling return to composure, as if he hadn't just threatened a child. Good girl, he said, his voice returning to that artificial oily warmth. Just act like nothing is wrong when the old man calls. As he headed for the door, he instructed her to bring the notarized backup, revealing a second set of forged documents I hadn't accounted for in my initial audit. I felt a cold mechanical click in my chest. As I closed the laptop lid, the silence of my workshop now felt like a command center. They expect to meet a clerk tomorrow. They are going to meet the truth. I reached for my phone and dialed Evelyn Chambers, my voice a whisper that carried the weight of a funeral. It's happening tomorrow, Evelyn. We need to be ready by 9. The phone call to Evelyn was brief, the kind of conversation men have when there are no words left to waste, and the only thing remaining is the cold, hard geometry of a trap. I stood in my workshop, the smell of cold iron and motor oil clinging to my flannel shirt, feeling the strategic weight of the next 24 hours. I relayed the updated timeline to Evelyn Chambers, informing her that Trevor and Olivia intended to file the forged deed at the county office tomorrow morning at 9. I explained that Trevor had doubled down, weaponizing Emma's safety to force Olivia's hand. Evelyn's voice remained a pillar of professional ice over the line. She informed me that simply blocking the deed at the county level wasn't enough to stop Trevor's criminal associates. To trigger an immediate state-level asset freeze and provide the protection we needed, we required a formal in-person service of process. We won't just block them, Vincent, she said. We will serve them in the act. She agreed to coordinate with a civil process server to meet me at Olivia's rental house instead of the courthouse. We weren't just stopping a theft, we were turning their moment of victory into a formal ambush. I sat at my workbench and opened my tablet, the smooth screen glowing with the raw data of my family's betrayal. I didn't need the images of their faces anymore. The scratchy recorded voices were enough to dismantle Trevor's house of cards. I began the methodical process of cueing specific clips, my fingers moving with the precision I used to apply to bridge schematics. I selected the recording where Trevor mocked Olivia's blind loyalty while planning to abandon her for Costa Rica. Then I cued the chilling moment where he detailed Emma's school recess schedule. This isn't just evidence, I whispered to the empty workshop. It's a mirror. I tested the volume levels, ensuring the audio was clear enough to pierce through any lie Trevor might try to tell. Have you ever held the power to destroy a man's life in the palm of your hand? It's lighter than you'd expect, about the weight of a 10-inch tablet. I felt a calculated fury warming my chest, a stark contrast to the damp Oregon evening pressing against the workshop windows. Click. The playback was perfect. The betrayal was audible. I received a final text from Evelyn, confirming that because I had recorded these conversations in my own home, Oregon's one-party consent laws made the evidence fully admissible in civil proceedings. My home. My rules. The truth doesn't need permission when the foundation is already under attack. I felt a strange sense of professional satisfaction. As an engineer, I appreciate a system that works exactly as it was intended. I watched the low digital hum of the charging tablet and placed it carefully inside my jacket pocket. The weight of the device felt like a holstered weapon, solid and ready. As I reviewed the audio one last time, a voice caught my ear that I hadn't fully processed before. The woman Trevor was speaking to, the mistress he intended to flee with, wasn't a stranger. Her laugh was distinctive, a sharp sound I recognized from a rival engineering firm I had consulted for years ago. Melanie Vance, of course. The pieces clicked into place. She was a cutthroat project manager, notorious for her ruthlessness. This wasn't just about money. It was about a calculated takeover, a hostile acquisition of my life, orchestrated by two people I had trusted. The next morning, the air was crisp and cold, a perfect reflection of the steel resolve in my heart. I arrived at Olivia's rental house at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before their scheduled departure for the county office. The civil process server, a stern-faced woman named Brenda, was already waiting in an unmarked car down the street. Evelyn's plan was precise: catch them before they could even leave. I walked up to Olivia's front door, the tablet heavy in my pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and sorrow. This was it, the moment of truth. I rang the doorbell. Olivia opened the door, looking surprised. "Dad, what are you doing here so early?" Her eyes darted nervously, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "Just thought I'd drop by," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Before you head out for your errands." I emphasized the word errands, watching her flinch. Just then, Trevor appeared behind her, buttoning his shirt. He forced a smile. "Vincent, what a surprise. To what do we owe the pleasure?" His eyes, however, were cold and calculating. "Just wanted to say goodbye," I replied, pulling the tablet from my pocket. "And to show you something." I pressed play. The recording filled the quiet morning air. Trevor's voice, clear and unmistakable, mocking Olivia, detailing Emma's school schedule to the loan sharks. Olivia's sobbing, her desperate pleas, the chilling threat about Emma's safety. Every word, every nuance of their betrayal, echoed through the living room. Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her face drained of color as she heard her husband's true intentions, the cold, calculated way he had used her and threatened their child. Trevor's forced smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure rage. He lunged for the tablet, but I was ready. I stepped back, and in that instant, Brenda, the process server, emerged from the shadows, a stack of legal documents in her hand. "Trevor Vance," she stated, her voice sharp and authoritative, "you have been served. These documents initiate a state-level asset freeze and a full criminal investigation into fraud, coercion, and endangerment of a minor." Trevor froze, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He looked from Brenda to me, then back to Olivia, who was now staring at him with a mixture of horror and disgust. You set me up," he stammered, his voice cracking. "No, Trevor," I said, my voice steady. "You set yourself up. I just made sure the truth had an audience." The next few hours were a blur of legalities. The police arrived, called by Brenda, and Trevor was taken into custody. Olivia, shattered and broken, confessed everything, providing crucial details that solidified the case against him. The forged deeds were blocked, the loan sharks were identified, and Emma's safety was secured. In the aftermath, Olivia and I had a long, painful conversation. She was devastated, not just by Trevor's betrayal, but by her own complicity. She had been blinded by love, by fear, and by a desperate hope that Trevor would change. It was a hard truth, but one she needed to hear. I told her that while I couldn't undo the past, we could build a new future, one founded on honesty and trust. It would take time, and a lot of work, but I was willing to try, for Emma's sake. Weeks turned into months. Trevor was convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Melanie Vance, his accomplice, was also implicated and faced legal consequences. My house, my home, was safe, but the emotional scars remained. Olivia started therapy, slowly rebuilding her life, finding a strength she never knew she possessed. Emma, thankfully, was too young to fully understand the depth of the betrayal, but she thrived under Olivia's renewed attention and my unwavering love. The greatest engineering feat of my life wasn't building the fortress, but knowing when it was finally safe enough to take the walls down. "A home isn't a structure you defend," I whispered to the cold Oregon night. "It's a place where you finally stop looking over your shoulder." I turned and looked out at the snow-covered garden, where Patricia's roses sleep beneath the frost, safe and undisturbed. The orange glow of the sunset hit the white drifts, turning the backyard into a sea of fire and ice. The cycle of seasons is the ultimate blueprint, a reminder that even the deepest winter is just a preparation for a new spring. I am an old man, and my hands are tired. But as I look at the house, I know that Emma's future is as secure as the roots of those roses. I've done my job. The foundation is deep, the materials are honest, and the house stands firm. The roots are deep enough now, I thought, feeling a triumphant peace. Sleep well, Patricia. I finished the work. The curtain is more than fabric. It's the final boundary of a man's soul. It is the line between the public war and the private peace. I stood there for a long minute, letting the cold bite into my lungs one last time. A reminder that I was still here, still standing, and still the master of my own domain. Click. The lock turned. The story ended. I opened the back door and stepped into the sudden welcoming warmth of the kitchen, the smell of wood oil and my old jacket clinging to me. I set the master key on the anniversary bowl, the ceramic clink sounding like a gavel, bringing a long trial to order. I looked out the window one last time at the fading light over the pines. There are no more secrets, no more recordings, and no more shadows to chase. Before I walked away from the glass, I thought of the small digital drive I'd tucked into the back of the jewelry box Emma and I finished. It contains a video message for her to open on her 18th birthday, explaining why her grandfather did what he did, ensuring the truth survives long after my own heartbeat fades. "Good night, world," I murmured. "I'm home." I pulled the curtain shut, the darkness of the yard disappearing as the warm light of the kitchen took hold. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look back. The structure was sound. The project was complete. Looking back at this family story, my biggest mistake wasn't trusting my daughter. It was staying silent when I first noticed the cracks in our foundation. I thought ignoring the warning signs would protect them, but silence only gave the rot more room to grow. Don't be like me. Don't wait until your entire world is collapsing before you start asking the hard questions about what's really happening inside your own home. This dad revenge wasn't just about reclaiming stolen assets. It was about teaching a brutal lesson that trust is a structure, and once you sabotage it from within, the entire building comes down. The strongest fortresses aren't built with steel and concrete, but with truth and accountability. I truly believe the Lord's timing is always perfect, even when it feels like a storm is tearing everything apart. He gave me the strength to be the father and grandfather my family story needed, even when it meant becoming someone I never thought I'd be. My dad revenge taught me this. Protection isn't just about locks and legal documents. It's about having the courage to enforce consequences when the people you love cross lines that should never be crossed. The master key of integrity is the only legacy worth leaving behind. In every family story, there comes a moment when you must choose between comfortable lies and painful truths. I chose truth. And though it cost me dearly, my granddaughter will grow up knowing that some things, like her safety and her future, are worth any price. This dad revenge is complete. The fortress stands, and I finally understand that love sometimes means letting people hit the ground hard enough to wake up.